Welcome to the My Bard story.
Hello, everyone. So today we're taking a deep dive into what I think is a truly fascinating and honestly pivotal moment in the life of Abram. It's there in Genesis chapter 14, verses 17 through 24.
Yeah, it seems almost tucked away sometimes, doesn't it? But it's packed with significance.
Exactly. It's not just some, minor historical note. There's real theological punch here. We get this mysterious figure, Melchizedek, showing up.
And Abram faces this really critical choice, right? It reveals so much about living by faith, especially how we interact with the world.
It does. Abram's just come back victorious, rescued Lot, won this huge battle against these kings.
In riding high, you could say. And then suddenly, bam, he's met by two very different people, one right after the other.
And our study notes really highlight how that sequence and Abram's interactions, they offer some crucial insights.
Right. So we're going to unpack this section, use our notes, look at the details, maybe some surprising ones, and think about what it means for us today, particularly for those in ministry.
Absolutely. It's like Abram is standing at a fork in the road, isn't he? Straight after this major victory.
Yeah, one path represented by, well, a worldly king offering worldly things.
And the other path, a king priest representing God Most High, offering blessing. Abram's choice here, it's not just about loot from a battle. It's a huge statement about who his ultimate source is.
Okay, let's get right into the text then. We'll follow our study notes. Starting with Genesis 14, verse 17 from the NIV. After Abram returned from defeating Chedorlaomer and the kings allied with him, the king of Sodom came out to meet him in the valley of Sheva, that is, the king's valley.
Okay, so this verse, it's all about setting the stage, the context. Abram's just pulled off this incredible military feat against the odds.
Rescued Lot, got back all the possessions. He's definitely the hero of the hour for places like Sodom.
Right, the very cities that had been defeated and captured. And who's the first person waiting for him? The king of Sodom.
That timing just jumps out. And the location, too. The Valley of Sheva, that is, the King's Valley. Our notes mention this is traditionally thought to be near Jerusalem.
Yeah, possibly south of the city, maybe where the Kidron and Hinnom valleys meet. That location detail adds a layer,
How so?
Well, it suggests a public, maybe even a kind of official place, a valley known for important meetings. The king of Sodom isn't just like bumping into him. He's making a formal public appearance to meet his rescuer.
And remember, earlier in the chapter, verse 10, this same king had actually fled the battle and fallen into tar pits.
Exactly. So he's coming out of hiding, so to speak, to face the man who just saved him in his city. It definitely creates a sense of tension. What's he going to offer? What are his motives?
It really does position Abram at that junction you mentioned. Standing there in the valley, and these two figures are about to approach him one by one. First up, the guy representing the worldly realm he just rescued.
And the narrative seems very deliberate about that order. The king of Sodom first, representing the rescued world, its people, its potential wealth. It sets up the immediate test for Abram. How is the man of faith going to handle this?
Which leads us right into verse 18 and the appearance of figure number 2. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High.
And here he is, Melchizedek. What an entrance. A king, yes, but also uniquely a priest. King of Salem.
Which our notes and tradition connect with ancient Jerusalem.
Right. And his name, Melchizedek, is significant too.
Doesn't it mean something like, my king is righteous, or king of righteousness?
Exactly. So you've got the king of righteousness and the king of peace. Since Salem means peace, that's quite a combination, even before we get to the priesthood part. And he comes out bringing bread and wine.
Okay, the bread and wine. Later traditions definitely read a lot into that, but what about the immediate context here in Genesis?
In the immediate context, the note suggests we should primarily see this as an act of hospitality, of provision. Think about it. Abram and his men, they've just fought a battle, traveled. They'd be exhausted, hungry.
So bringing bread and wine is a generous welcome, a gesture of fellowship.
Yeah, customary sustenance from one leader to a victorious group. It signifies welcome, acceptance. But like you said, it's clearly more than just a local king bringing snacks.
Right, that title, priest of God Most High, that's the kicker.
Absolute crucial. The Hebrew is El Elyon. Now, our notes point out this title, El Elyon. It was known in the ancient Near East. Sometimes it was even associated with the chief Canaanite god El. But the Bible here immediately connects this title to the supreme God, and it sets the stage perfectly for Abram himself to explicitly identify El Elyon with his own covenant God Yahweh, just a few verses later.
So this priesthood isn't the later Levitical one. It's something earlier.
Exactly. It's a unique pre-Israelite priesthood acknowledging the Most High God. It suggests, fascinatingly, that a knowledge of the supreme God might have existed outside Abram's direct line at that time.
Wow. Okay, let's hear the blessing he gives Abram in verse 19. And he blessed Abram, saying, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth.
So Melchizedek acts in his priestly role and blesses Abram. Notice, he blesses Abram by God. Most High God is the source. And that description of God, wow, creator of heaven and earth, Hebrew, Kunar Shemayim Wadarya.
This is one of those places our notes really flagged, isn't it? Of the meaning of kuno.
Yes, exactly. This is a key insight drawing on scholars of ancient Semitic languages. While kuno can sometimes mean possessor or owner, the notes argue quite strongly, based on evidence from languages like Phoenician and Ugaritic, that here, creator is the much better, more accurate translation.
And why does that distinction matter so much?
Well, think about it. If God is just the possessor, he owns stuff that's already there. But if he's the creator, he's the one who brought it all into existence.
Okay, yeah, that's a huge difference.
It is. It elevates the whole thing. This isn't just some local deity Melchizedek is talking about. This is the universal originator, the absolute sovereign over everything. He's saying Abram's blessing comes from this God. It frames Abram's victory within God's ultimate cosmic power.
That really deepens the significance of that blessing. And the praise continues in verse 20. And praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Then Abram gave him 1/10 of everything.
So Melchizedek shifts from blessing Abram to praising God for the victory. He explicitly gives the credit to God Most High. And our notes point out this really beautiful, almost hidden detail in the Hebrew word used for delivered.
Oh, right, the wordplay you mentioned.
That's the one. The verb is migan. And fascinatingly, it comes from the same root as the Hebrew word for shield, which is megan.
And Megan shows up right in the next chapter, Genesis 15:1, when God tells Abram, I am your shield.
Bingo. It's a subtle but powerful literary link. The notes suggest the biblical author uses these related roots to connect God's past action, his shielding of Abram in battle by delivering his enemies, with his future promise to be Abram's personal shield, his ongoing protector.
It shows God's character is consistent. His care is continuous across the story. That's amazing.
It really is. It's one of those details that just opens up the text. And Abram's response to all this, immediate. He gives Melchizedek 1/10 of everything.
A tithe.
Yes, a tithe of the spoils. The notes clarify this is likely a voluntary act here. It's his worshipful response, acknowledging God's hand, recognizing Melchizedek's unique priestly role. It's different from the later mandatory tithe in the law of Moses, but it's this powerful early expression of Abram's piety. He gets it, the victory came from God.
Okay, so after this profound spiritual encounter, the camera immediately swings back to the other guy waiting. Verse 21. The king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the people and keep the goods for yourself.
Talk about whiplash. From the king of righteousness and peace, priest of God Most High, to the king of, well, wicked Sodom.
And his offer sounds practical on the surface.
It does. He wants his people back, the NICOT, the souls or persons. But he says Abram can keep the rekus, the material goods, the plunder recovered.
Give me the people, you keep the stuff. Seems like a standard post-battle negotiation, maybe.
It might align with some customs, yeah, where the victor claims the spoils. But the notes suggest we should look deeper. This offer really reveals the king's priorities. Regain his population, perhaps reassert his own standing. It sets up this stark ethical test for Abram right after that moment of worship. The world, via Sodom, is offering Abram enrichment.
And Abram's reply in verse 22 is just so strong and deliberate. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, with raised hand I have sworn an oath to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth.
He responds with a solemn oath, raising the hand that's an ancient gesture signifying a binding vow. But look at the divine title he uses. He takes the exact title Melchizedek used, Elion, adds the descriptor, creator of heaven and earth, and then explicitly prefixes it with Yahweh, his covenant God.
So he's saying Yahweh, Elion, creator of heaven and earth. He's making the connection explicit.
Exactly. He's affirming the supreme God Melchizedek worships, the creator of everything, is Yahweh, the God who called me and made promises to me.
That's a huge theological statement right there in the middle of this
It
negotiation.
absolutely is. He's not just acknowledging a higher power, he's declaring the universal sovereignty of his God, Yahweh. And by swearing the oath, using this incredibly comprehensive, supreme divine title, he gives immense weight and solemnity to his refusal.
And the refusal itself in verse 23 is just absolute. That will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or the strap of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, I made Abram rich.
He vows to take nothing. Zero. And that phrase, not even a thread or the strap of a sandal, that's another detail our notes flag as really significant.
More than just a saying.
Yeah, scholars like Spicer, who our notes mention, pointed out this isn't just, a colorful idiom. It's actually a technical phrase, a Marinism, using extremes to mean everything in between. But Spicer found parallels in ancient Near Eastern legal documents. It was used specifically in contexts like dissolving partnerships or formally renouncing claims. It basically meant, I take absolutely nothing from this transaction.
Wow. So Abram might have been using a recognized legal formula of his time to make his refusal crystal clear and binding.
That's the insight. It underlines the total formal nature of his refusal and his reason, explicit, so that you will never be able to say, I made Abram rich.
He doesn't want any confusion about where his prosperity comes from, especially not from the king of Sodom.
Precisely. It's a powerful declaration of dependence solely on God. He wants it unmistakably clear. Any success, any wealth he has, comes from God alone, not from human benefactors, and certainly not from a morally compromised source like Sodom. Our notes even suggest this might be him learning from his earlier, ethically murky experience in Egypt with Pharaoh.
Interesting connection back to Genesis 12. He's drawing a line here.
He is, protecting his testimony, ensuring God gets all the glory for his provision. It's about integrity.
Getting others.
Yeah.
I will accept nothing but what my men have eaten and the share that belongs to the men who went with me to Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them have their share.
Right. He's principled, but also practical and fair. He makes two logical exceptions. First, the food his own men consume that's just basic necessity for the campaign.
Sure.
Second, and this is important, the rightful share belonging to his allies Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. These were his Amorite confederates mentioned back in verse 13 with whom he had a treaty.
So his personal vow not to profit from Sodom doesn't mean he breaks his agreements or shortchanges his allies.
Not at all. The notes stress this demonstrates his fairness, his loyalty, his respect for treaty obligations. He honors his commitments. They fought too, and according to the customs of war, they deserve their portion of the spoils. Abram ensures they get it, even as he personally renounces any gain from Sodom.
So his integrity before God works hand in hand with justice and loyalty in his human relationships. It's not one or the other.
Exactly. It's an integrated faith. His stand for God doesn't make him neglect his responsibilities to people.
Okay, wow. There's just so much layered into these few verses. Stepping back from the verse by verse, what are some of those really maybe overlooked scholarly insights that just make you go, the things that might surprise us?
Yeah, our study notes pull out several really illuminating points that scholars focus on. We've touched on some, but let's revisit them. The whole figure of Melchizedek, for starters.
His just appearing out of nowhere, essentially.
Yeah.
No genealogy.
Right. In Genesis, where lineage is usually so crucial, he just appears. King of Salem, priest of Elion, and Abram, the covenant father, pays him tithes and receives his blessing. That's huge.
It definitely puts Melchizedek in a position of, significant spiritual authority, even over Abram at that moment.
It does. And this very uniqueness, his priesthood being outside the later Levitical system, his mysterious presentation in the text, this is exactly what makes him so vital for later biblical theology. Our notes point directly to the New Testament book of Hebrews,
Which uses Melchizedek as a type, a foreshadowing of Christ's priesthood.
Precisely. Hebrews chapter 7 really digs into this. It highlights how Genesis presents Melchizedek without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean he was literally, say, an angel or pre-incarnate Christ.
But the text presents him that way,
Yeah.
omitting those details intentionally.
That's the key insight. The way Genesis tells the story, or rather, what it doesn't tell us about his origins or end, sets him apart from the Levitical priests who depended entirely on documented lineage and lifespan. This textual silence allows the writer of Hebrews to argue for a superior eternal priesthood, foreshadowed by Melchizedek and fulfilled perfectly in Jesus.
So the New Testament isn't just pulling this connection out of thin air, it's building directly on the specific, unusual details right here in Genesis 14.
Exactly. It shows how deeply the Old Testament anticipates the New. It's not just a historical curiosity, it's theologically pregnant.
Okay, what else stands out from the scholarly perspective?
Well, that point about Kuno Shemayim Aleya, creator of heaven and earth, the notes really emphasize the linguistic evidence supporting creator over just possessor.
We talked about how that elevates the whole understanding of God here.
It does. It frames the encounter in terms of God's absolute universal sovereignty as the originator of all things. It's not just owning resources, it's bringing everything into being. That makes Abram's alignment with this God and his rejection of Sodom's goods even more profound. He's choosing the creator over the created spoils.
That contrast is really powerful when you see it that way.
And related to Abram's rejection, remember the insight about the phrase, not even a thread or the strap of a sandal.
That it wasn't just an idiom, but potentially a formal legal way of saying, I renounce all claims.
Exactly. Spizer's research, cited in our notes showing parallels in ancient Near Eastern legal texts, adds that formal weight. It turns Abram's moral stance into a public, possibly legally recognized declaration of complete dissociation from Sodom's wealth. It underscores the totality of his commitment.
It adds that layer of deliberate, culturally understood action to his words.
It does. And one more time, that elegant Migamogan wordplay between verse 20, delivered shielded, and Genesis 15.1, I am your shield. Scholars highlight this as a subtle but intentional literary thread.
Connecting God's past action with his future promise.
Right. Reinforcing God's consistent character as Abram's protector. It's these kinds of details that make the text so rich when you dig in.
They really do. It moves us beyond just the surface story. So thinking about all this richness, let's pivot to today. As we reflect on Abram in that valley, meeting Melchizedek, facing the king of Sodom. What are the core takeaways, the practical applications that our notes highlight for believers now, especially for those of us leading or serving in ministry?
Okay, yeah, application.
Yeah.
One fundamental message has to be about acknowledging God in our successes, in our victories.
Just like Melchizedek gave God the credit and Abram responded with worship.
Exactly. It's so easy, isn't it, when things go well, ministry grows, challenges are overcome, personal goals are met to focus on our own efforts, our strategies, our team.
Or maybe even just breathe a sigh of relief and move on.
Right. But the notes really emphasize the need to consciously, consistently attribute that success to God. He delivered, he provided, he gave the growth. Giving him the glory keeps us humble, keeps us dependent, keeps us rightly oriented. For pastors, leaders, modeling this is huge, constantly pointing people back to God as the source of every good thing, not just celebrating human achievement.
That posture of attributing success rightly is so key. What about Abram's firm no to the king of Sodom?
Ah, yes. This speaks volumes about integrity, doesn't it? Especially in our financial dealings and our interactions with the, let's say, secular world or systems whose values might clash with ours. Abram refusing anything from Sodom so no one could claim they made him rich. That's a powerful principle.
It's about more than just avoiding illegal stuff. It's about appearances, about potential compromise, about who gets the credit.
Precisely. The notes highlight this. Believers, and maybe especially ministries, need to be super careful about situations where accepting resources, forming partnerships, or gaining influence could even appear to make us indebted to worldly sources, or allow the world to take credit for God's blessing on us.
So, asking those hard questions, are there strings attached? Does this alliance blur the lines? Could this partnership compromise our witness down the road?
Exactly those kinds of questions. Abram's example challenges us to ensure our reliance is clearly, unambiguously on God alone. It's about safeguarding our testimony, making sure everyone knows our flourishing comes from the Lord, God Most High, not from compromising associations.
That principle of protecting the source of our blessing, ensuring God gets the glory, is really vital for our witness. What else?
Well, the Melchizedek encounter itself carries a huge reminder about true worship and the nature of priesthood. This unique priest-king outside the later Levitical system, he points us forward.
Ultimately to Jesus Christ, our great high priest, as Hebrews explains.
Yes. It reminds us that God's plan for relating to him wasn't always confined to one specific ethnic or institutional structure. While the Levitical system was God's plan for Israel for a time, Melchizedek foreshadows a priesthood based on divine appointment and character, not just lineage.
So for us today, it reinforces that our access to God is directly through Christ's perfect eternal priesthood.
Absolutely. It keeps our focus on the substance Christ completed work rather than getting overly hung up on just the external forms of religion. It reminds us that Christ is our supreme mediator. And interestingly, it also hints at God's heart for all peoples, right? Here's Melchizedek, likely a Canaanite king, yet a recognized priest of the Most High God.
Yeah, that suggests God was already at work beyond Abram's immediate circle. It broadens our perspective.
It does. It has implications for how we view God's work in the world and our approach to mission.
Okay, so as we draw this deep dive to a close, it's clear Genesis 14.1724 is anything but minor. It's incredibly rich.
Yeah, we see Abram's character tested and proven. We see God's sovereignty proclaimed. We get this amazing foreshadowing of Christ's priesthood.
And that stark intentional contrast between Melchizedek offering blessing and the king of Sodom offering worldly gain.
And Abram's response to both is just definitive. His refusal of Sodom's wealth, based on his commitment to God's glory, is such a powerful model of integrity.
And Melchizedek serves as this incredible bridge, connecting God's deliverance in the battle with his future promises and pointing way down the road to Jesus.
It really forces us to ask ourselves, where do we truly seek our security, our validation, our provision? Is it from God Most High, the Creator? Or are we tempted by the offers of the world?
That leads perfectly into a reflection point for you, our listeners, especially if you're serving in ministry or leadership. Consider Abram's radical refusal of Sodom's wealth. His motive was clear. He wanted God alone to get the credit for his prosperity. How might that specific principle challenge or maybe reshape your approach to finances, partnerships, or even seeking influence or recognition within your ministry context today?
Yeah, think about those situations, maybe subtle ones, where aligning with certain people, accepting certain resources, or chasing certain kinds of recognition might come with unspoken expectations or compromises. How could those things potentially obscure God's hand in your work? How can you, like Abram, make it unmistakably clear that your ministry's effectiveness, your personal well-being, it all flows from the Lord God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and isn't dependent on human favor or worldly systems?
Some deep things to consider there. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Genesis 14.
We really pray this exploration has been helpful, enriching, and gives you much to meditate on and apply.
Until next time, keep seeking the depths of God's Word.